afternoon. I have that new play that you requested. So it's called The Empress of Morocco. That's obviously a parody of Settl's play of the same name. But it's got a bit of Macbeth thrown in as well, just for good measure. So here are your parts. Don't lose them, paper's expensive. It took me ages to write these out. So at the top are your character names, and then in brackets are your cue lines. Have a read. We'll be performing them on Thursday. I'm joking, of course, you don't actually have to read, but I will come back to that in a minute. So I am going to be talking about putting on a play in early modern London, kind of focusing on the practicalities of that. So looking at the rehearsal process, special effects, and then kind of more generally about how they evolved to affect the overall meaning of theatre and its wider place in society. So I opened like that, not just to make myself look silly, but to kind of illustrate how a play may have been presented to an acting company. Obviously they had an incredibly short rehearsal process, a couple of days at max, which is obviously very different to how it would be today. And kind of very, it seemed to be very casual as well, not like the strict professionalism that you'd expect today. But then, as Sker and Egan say, it's kind of, obviously we weren't there, so we don't know anyway, but there would also have been massive differences between the practices of companies and playhouses, which again is something that you'd expect today, because not every company rehearses in the same way, everyone has their own way of doing it. So Tiffany Stern kind of explains that the play that you saw on stage, it wasn't just a manifestation of the one text that the playwright had written, but it was an oral and visual gathering of the contents of many scattered manuscripts. So that would have included the play text itself, obviously what the playwright had come up with. There would have been a cast list, would have had the actors' names and the characters' names on. There would have been the actor's part, which is kind of the thing that I've given you, that's just kind of a one-line example, which they would have had just their lines with a few cue words or lines added in. And there would also have been a backstage plot, which I'll come back to in a second. If we take The Night of the Burning Pestle as an example, there would have been one copy, probably, of the complete text, assuming the playwright had finished it. And that would have been held by the prompter, or book holder, book bearer, bookkeeper, all of those terms are synonymous. And there was no director. Obviously the playwright would have had as much input as they wanted, but then it was really up to the actors to kind of take it upon themselves to do what they wanted. But I think, and that kind of would have led to a lot of improvised kind of material on stage in the heat of the moment. And it meant that they didn't necessarily have kind of that full understanding of the plot, or even how their character fitted in relation to other characters, or relation to the plot overall. But I think that's kind of what theatre was, or what it seemed to be at the time. It was fun, it was raucous, it was a method of storytelling, and of course it was a social gathering. But they did have this backstage plot, which was kind of an attempt, I guess, to have some kind of order both backstage and on stage. And it was designed to help the actors and the prompter know when they were to enter the stage and when they were to exit. So a bit like maybe the notes that a modern stage manager might have today. So I've drawn up one based on research for The Night of the Burning Pestle, but the original cast isn't really known, so I've used the recent London cast from Sam Wanamaker Playhouse. So you can see that it's divided into boxes, and it only really says the entrances on them, and it's always the character names that come first, and then the actor names, and sometimes the actor names weren't even included at all, it was just the characters. And then these horizontal lines indicate the clear stage, so that the actors knew that once they'd done this scene, they all had to have left by that point, and then the next lot would come on. And Paul Werstone sums it up quite well. He says, after a horizontal line, a plot then carefully lists who is to enter first, and then who is to enter to them. until exits empty the stage, and then another horizontal line is drawn, and the process is repeated, so you end up with this kind of grid structure. In terms of prop notes, they would have been confined mostly to personals, which meant kind of small props that you could carry upon your person, so maybe a handkerchief or a pipe, that kind of thing. And then any other notes would have been kind of scribbled in the margin by whoever needed them. But they were used by everyone, and it was a way of kind of all the actors, all the musicians, all the stage keepers having this one document that they could all refer to and kind of keep track of the play. And with the restoration of the theatres, the reopening of the theatres in the restoration in 1660, there was more to keep track of because there was the addition of all these new kind of special effects. So before the war, there had been merely the structure of the playhouse and a few machines and scenic emblems. But Restoration theatre was indeed a new kind of theatre, and the introduction of scenes and actresses, the delight in music and spectacle, and the determination to appeal to an educated and fashionable audience created a new style in English drama. So whereas Renaissance theatre kind of relied very much on the actors and minimal props, and it was more about imagination and kind of evoking that in the audience. Even the Sam Wanamaker production of Night of the Burning Pestle we went to see, they didn't really have that many special effects, considering it was a modern performance. But the actors did make use of kind of the whole playhouse. So they were down in the auditorium in the pit, they were up in the heavens, they used the balconies, they used the barrier between the audience and the stage. And they also used music and dance. And music and dance was something that really kind of came into its own in the Restoration. There's a lot of inspiration taken from the conventions of the Italian opera at the time. And this also brought with it more elaborate costumes, as well as a Baroque style of painting, which was used for scenery. And it also meant that they started to make scenery that looked 3D, so that illusion in painting, which was not really something that had been done before. But more exciting than that, they introduced movable scenery. They had trapdoors, flying, and pyrotechnics. And all of this kind of came together and was termed the Restoration Spectacular. So within The Empress of Morocco, which is the play that I began with at the beginning, within the first few lines, there's already, this was written in 1974, so there's already loads of special effects. It starts with thunder and lightning, there's the descent of a ghost, so straight away it's different from the Night of the Burning Pestle, which doesn't really have, it's set in the theatre really, that's its setting. And Thomas Shadwell's Psyche, in 1975 is a really good example of a play that had a really specific setting. So the scene is a very deep walk in the midst of a mighty wood, through which is seen a prospect of a very pleasant country. Which again could have been an example of 3D scenery. It also had very specific music cues. So in the Night of the Burning Pestle, it kind of just says music. But this had kind of long explanations of exactly the kind of music that it had. It's a symphony of recorders and soft music, and it had ambitious direction. So Venus descends in her chariot drawn with doves. So assumingly they used the flying to bring down this huge kind of chariot. And then the scene changes to a rocky desert full of dreadful caves, cliffs and precipices, with a high rock looking down into the sea. So the shift is really from imagination to making it a reality on the stage, whereas in The Night of the Burning Pestle they talk about walking through the forest, but it's not really shown on the stage, whereas now they can actually show all of these settings. And all of this may have been done with the help of Giacomo Torelli, who was a magical innovator in stage machinery, and he invented mechanical means of changing borders and side wings. So he kind of developed this idea that you put all the scenery on little trucks, and then you have these kind of metal runways in the floor, or probably wooden in those days, in the floor, and then you could be able to wheel them on and off, and that's what's still used in theatre today. So when I was researching this, in the Restoration, there's a lot of talk of magic and spectacle. And I think that's what makes theatre so exciting. And that shift from kind of imagination to reality, having it there on stage, that was the main change between Renaissance and Restoration. And even today, theatre is still inherently embedded in culture, except now it's obviously a multi-million-pound, very corporate business. And even the number of theatres, so this is Shakespeare's London, all the red dots are the theatres, and obviously there's quite a few as we know. But if you look at just the west side, and then this is today, it's got about 3 times the amount of theatres just in that small area. So we can trace the outlines of theatrical mains, but the harder work is to fill in the blanks. And I think performances at the Globe and at the Sound Maker Playhouse, it can end up really bogged down in that kind of historical retail that you kind of end up with this weirdly oxymoronically ersatz theatre, which is a bit of a mouthful of a phrase from Paul Menzer. But it kind of means that performances today are almost an inferior substitute to the original. We're trying to reproduce these new productions, but they are new. They're obviously not what they were. It's not the same, and it shouldn't be the same. The performance's only life is in the present, which is what Peggy Phelan said, and I completely agree with that. I think, yes, a play may have been written in the past, and it's interesting to research how it would have been done, but we should focus on what it is now, what it is today, and what it means to us today. And I think that it's fair to say that early modern theatre kind of really created the grounds for modern theatre, and who knows what the future of theatre will be. There's my opinion.
Thank you.
Questions? I've got a question about the special effects. You mentioned that and like something about pyrotechnics. Have you got was there like a specific example of how that might have been used, or?
Yeah, so the thunder and lightning in the Empress of Morocco. I know that they did thunder by they had these wooden rungs which kind of zigzag down like that, and they'd roll a cannonball down it.
Or like a cascade type thing.
Yeah, and it would be underneath the stage, so that you just get this kind of rumbling effect that would kind of fill the auditorium. And I've seen one in another theatre in London, and it's amazing. It still works, and it sounds really good. And I think lightning, especially in the Restoration, probably would have been used for pyrotechnics, fireworks. So that was something they were quite into.
Do you think there's any sort of wider significance we can draw from the kind of the nature of the audiences that these plays may have attracted, and different sort of appeal to different constituencies across the period you're talking about?
Oh, you mean like from the Renaissance?
Yeah,
yeah.
Basically sort of 60, 70 years back.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Restoration obviously had a more kind of elite audience, I guess, because of the presence of the king and stuff at the theatre. And I think it just became a bigger event, whereas theatre was very much kind of part of everyday life, so like peeps would go to the theatre, just to the theatre and then to the pub. Like, it was just a part of everyday life, whereas it became more of an event, perhaps, like it's an event today, like people book months in advance today. It's become the theatre and it's the place to go. And I think that was kind of the same in the Restoration.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Thank you.